Have you ever paused in the middle of life and asked yourself, why does simply living true to yourself already feel so difficult? Why do you apologize just for existing, automatically shrink your voice, and avoid gazes that might touch the truest part inside you? You call it personality, a lack of confidence. But Nietzsche would say it plainly. This is not your nature. These are the marks of invisible chains that were fastened onto you when you were still too young to resist. For Nietzsche, shame is not a natural emotion. It is a refined mechanism of domestication, a tool that teaches human beings to doubt their own vital force. And at a certain point, you do not just feel shame, you begin to live by it. You become the version society finds easiest to accept, and at the same time, the version most alien to yourself. This video is not advice telling you to be more confident. This is a detox journey, stripping away the origins of shame, exposing the mechanism of self-betrayal, and reclaiming the supreme right you have lost, the right to create your own identity. Stay until the end, because once you truly begin to overcome shame and reclaim your identity in the Nietzschean sense, there will be no path back to the old cage. Number 1. Shame is not yours, but continuing to bow your head is your responsibility. You were not born feeling that something was wrong with you. No child enters life thinking, I am wrong, I am inadequate, or I must make myself smaller to be accepted. What you are carrying, the tightness in your chest, the reflex to lower your head, the habit of apologizing simply for existing, is not essential. It is the residue of a prolonged process of domestication. A world that could not tolerate the natural strength of human beings planted it in you, little by little, when you were not yet capable of resisting. Nietzsche would not call this innate weakness. He would call it a lesson imposed by force. And only when you dare to face this truth directly does awakening begin. Return to a very early moment in your life when you were still too small to protect yourself. You ran, fell, and burst into tears. And instead of being acknowledged, you heard a sharp voice. What is there to cry about? You fell silent. Not because you understood reason, but because you learned your first brutal rule. Your emotions are a nuisance. Or another time, you expressed too much personality, too much vitality, and received a cold look. What kind of girl is so strong? What kind of boy is so timid? In that instant, a seed was planted in you. It took root. And later, every time you tried to live truthfully, that voice flared up in your head. Don't! You're not allowed to be like that. No one needed to tie you up anymore. You had learned to tie yourself. Nietzsche saw this mechanism very early. He named it precisely. Society domesticates human beings by turning instinct into guilt. When those who lack the strength to rise by themselves gain the power to define morality, they do not beat you with whips. They make you ashamed of your own life energy. When instinct is labeled dangerous, when difference is branded rebellious, when freedom is considered selfish, shame becomes the invisible collar. To understand that shame is not yours, look at Ethan's story. Ethan grew up with a demanding mother who corrected everything about him: how he sat, how he spoke, how he held a spoon, even his facial expressions. One small mistake, and he was criticized in front of others. Over time, a child's natural curiosity turned into fear of criticism. By adolescence, Ethan avoided competitions, dared not share ideas, and apologized even when nothing was wrong. Shame did not arise from within him. It was planted by someone else's insecurity. But the tragedy began when Ethan believed it was his nature. At that moment, identity was swapped without a single act of violence. Imagine a bird born to fly far. But from very early on, a thin string is tied to its leg. At first, it can still fly a few meters, but each time it crosses the boundary, the string jerks it back. Once, twice, then hundreds of times, until one day, no one needs to pull anymore. The bird looks at the sky and no longer believes it is meant for itself. Do you call that weakness? No. It was taught to become smaller. And that is exactly your shape when you live under the rule of toxic shame. Toxic shame is not guilt over a wrong action. It is the belief that you yourself, in your true nature, are wrong. And this is what Nietzsche despised most, a culture that creates people who doubt their own instinct to live. Family teaches you, don't be a burden. Religion teaches you, desire is sinful. Society teaches you, difference is trouble. School teaches you, follow the procedure. The result is not better human beings, but more compliant ones. You shrink so others will not be uncomfortable, and they call that state right. Nietzsche asks only one cold question: right for whom? Breaking shame does not begin with "be more confident." That is the language of those who have never paid the price. Breaking shame begins with detox. Understanding that shame is not a natural emotion, but a tool of control passed down through generations. When you realize this, a crack appears in the wall that has imprisoned you for too long. From that moment on, each time shame surges up, you no longer ask, "Where am I wrong?" You ask directly, "Who benefits when I believe I am wrong simply for being myself?" And when that question echoes often enough, the old story the world stuffed into you begins to wobble. You see clearly, shame is not you. It is just dirt that has clung to you through years of submission. Your task is not to improve yourself, but to strip away what does not belong to you. Nietzsche believed that what lies buried beneath that dust, once liberated, would be stronger than any moral system that ever tried to make you bow your head. If you feel the first crack in the wall that has confined you for years, do not send that signal to the world. The world does not need to know. Write it down for yourself with a single word: rising. Not to be applauded, but to mark the moment you stop accepting life in the shadow that shame has built. This is not a victory. It is the first time you stand upright. Number 2, overcome shame. The moment you stop asking permission to exist. From the moment you see the chains and still continue to act as if you need permission to exist, shame is no longer something imposed from outside. It becomes chosen complicity. Nietzsche does not care about what happened when you were too small to choose. He looks straight at the present and asks one question: why, even after seeing the chains, do you continue to live as if they are part of who you are? And it is here that the second tragedy begins. Not the tragedy of the victim, but the tragedy of the accomplice. Shame does not disappear because you understand it. Nietzsche never believed that knowledge liberates human beings. If understanding were enough, the world would be full of free people. The harsher truth is this: many people understand perfectly well what imprisons them and still continue to live inside it. Not because they do not know, but because they are not willing to pay the price. Overcoming shame is not a problem of awareness. It is a problem of action. And action always comes with loss. Nietzsche looks directly at this pivotal moment and says something uncompromising. Shame exists only as long as you act as if you need permission to exist. It is not the world that holds you back. You are the one standing at the threshold of freedom. waiting for a signal that will never come. He named this mechanism early on in Beyond Good and Evil. The individual has always had to struggle to keep from being overwhelmed by the tribe. Not because the tribe is strong, but because people willingly make themselves smaller to be accepted. The moment you wait for the crowd's permission to live, you hand them your identity without a single chain. Overcome shame, from Nietzsche's perspective, is not about soothing discomfort. It is about ending the habit of letting that discomfort decide your behavior. As long as you speak what is safe instead of what is truthful, as long as you adjust yourself to avoid causing discomfort, shame is still issuing commands. And Nietzsche calls that state not weakness, but self-renunciation of the self. In Greek tragedy, Achilles knows very well the prophecy of his life. If he stays home, he will live long but be forgotten. If he goes to Troy, he will die young, but his name will never disappear. This is not a story about courage, but a story about existential choice. Achilles understands that living safely means betraying the strongest part of himself. He goes to war not because he is called, nor because of moral duty, but because he refuses to exist as a life made smaller. Nietzsche looks at that choice and draws the conclusion that makes modern people most uncomfortable. The value of a person is measured by what they are willing to give up in order not to live against themselves. No identity is preserved for free. Shame persists because you continually choose the lowest risk option for your being. Reclaiming your identity does not begin with an explosion, but with the moment when you do not shrink, when you do not return to the old role just because it is familiar, but in order to end living in a version that has been made smaller for far too long. Nietzsche calls this the act of reclaiming the will. Not the will to control others, but the will that refuses to let the world decide the shape of one's soul. When you act against the habit of bowing your head, shame loses its function. It may still appear, but it no longer commands. And that is the crucial point. Freedom does not come when shame disappears, but when you no longer obey it. Reclaiming your identity is not a return to some original self in the past. Nietzsche never believed in pure return. For him, identity is an ongoing act. It is created each time you choose honesty over comfort, presence over dissolution, standing upright over being accepted. Each such choice is a declaration that requires no permission. I exist by my own law. From here on, there is no longer the question, should I? The only question that still matters is, am I willing to pay the price to be myself? If the answer is yes, shame loses its power. If the answer is no, you may understand everything, but you will never reclaim your identity. Nietzsche does not force you to choose. He simply places you before an unavoidable truth. No one lives your life for you, and no one pays that price for you. Overcoming shame is not a comfortable process. It is the moment you accept that freedom is always more expensive than safety. And reclaiming your identity begins precisely where you stop negotiating with the fear of being seen. Number 3. Slave morality, the origin of shame according to Nietzsche. Once you have looked directly at your own mechanism of self-betrayal, the question is no longer, where am I wrong? But, why does shame cling so tightly to human beings that it becomes an unspoken law of every culture? Why, everywhere from primitive tribes to modern cities, are people taught to shrink their instincts in order to be called decent, normal, proper? Nietzsche does not answer with morality. He dissects morality as a phenomenon of power, and he writes plainly in The Gay Science, morality is the herd instinct in the individual. The morality you are taught to respect is not a universal truth. It is the instinct of the herd implanted into each individual to domesticate them from within. And shame is the sharpest blade of that mechanism. If in the previous sections you saw shame planted in each individual, here Nietzsche forces you to confront a more uncomfortable truth. Shame is designed for the entire species. Throughout history, whenever life instinct, desire, creativity, the drive for self-assertion becomes too strong, it immediately threatens the order of those who are weaker, yet hold the power to define. Unable to win through real strength, they choose a more effective path, making you doubt your own strength. Instead of using whips, they use morality. Instead of shackling hands, they shackle minds. When you fear your own life energy, you are no longer dangerous. You become someone who condemns themselves, and that is the easiest kind of person to rule. Imagine that within every human being, there is a flame of desire to live, to create, to rise. For the strong, it is an engine. For those afraid of being overshadowed, it is a threat. Their strategy is not to extinguish the flame, but to teach you to believe that the flame is dangerous. So you pour water on yourself. You stand guard over your own prison. Nietzsche calls this system slave morality, a code not created to elevate human beings, but to keep them shrunken, controllable, and ashamed of anything that exceeds the norm. This mechanism does not live in philosophy books. It operates daily. Jordan is a young banker working in a glass building in the city center. Outside work, he photographs, sketches, and has unconventional ideas. In the first weeks, he even hung a few small photos on his desk. But a few offhand remarks from colleagues, "You're such an artist, we need more practical people here," were enough. Jordan began to adjust without anyone telling him to. He took the photos down, stopped talking about what he loved. In meetings, he kept his ideas safe, repeating what had already been accepted. His voice lower, his attitude more neutral. Not because his beliefs changed, but because he learned an unspoken lesson. If you want peace, don't stand out. His silence was not natural. It was trained. That is slave morality in its modern form. It does not knock you down. It praises you when you make yourself smaller and calls it maturity. It rewards you when you betray your nature and punishes you through coldness every time you live true to yourself. Nietzsche calls the deep motive of this system resentment, the suppressed resentment of the weak toward the strong. Unable to rise through action, they invert the value system. Courage is labeled recklessness. Aspiration is called greed. Self-assertion is called arrogance. Creativity is called rebellion. Independence is called selfishness. When this inversion lasts long enough, people begin to believe that weakness is moral and strength is something to be ashamed of. Nietzsche reverses this completely. Weakness is celebrated only because it is easier to control. The modern world does not need prisons. It chains you with seemingly harmless phrases. Don't be too ambitious. Don't be too confident. Don't be too different. It chains you with judging looks, with the fear of being excluded from the group, with morality trimmed to fit the majority. And from the moment you accept those subtle chains, no one needs to control you anymore. You control yourself. That is the pinnacle of slave morality. The greatest tragedy is this. People who live under slave morality do not know they are being guided. They call it decency. wisdom, maturity. But Nietzsche sets a cold standard. Any value that makes you smaller, that makes you doubt your instinct to live, that makes you fear your own inner strength, that is not morality. That is a chain. You cannot reclaim your identity if you still believe those values are sacred. When you begin to see morality as a tool of power rather than truth, a sharp reality appears. Shame is not born from your mistakes. It is born from a system that always needs you in a lower position. And lower position here is not social status, but the mental state easiest to manipulate, where you must ask permission to be yourself, where you fear being judged, where you shrink your instincts to fit others, where your own will is compressed until you forget it exists. And if, as you watch this, you feel uneasy rather than comforted, that is the right sign. Only ideas strong enough to shake you have the power to break the cage. Not to soothe you, but to force you to stand upright before the truth. Whose values have you been living by, and how much are you willing to pay to stop living as an obedient copy? If these ideas make you feel your old value system trembling beneath your feet, subscribe to the channel to continue walking with us and to keep a point of support for the journey out of the herd values that have shaped you for too long. Because freedom does not arrive in a single moment. It opens layer by layer, and each layer needs a place where you can look at yourself without bowing your head. Number 4. False self. When shame makes the will to power stop wanting to grow. From this point on, the journey no longer revolves around what you were taught or who planted shame inside you. Nietzsche forces you to confront a colder question. Does your current life still make you stronger, or are you living merely to avoid stepping outside a safe mold? For Nietzsche, human beings are not defined by morality, memory, or trauma, but by the will to power, the deepest tendency to expand, overcome, and challenge one's present form. He wrote in The Antichrist, "What is good? All that heightens the feeling of power, the will to power, power itself in man. Where that will is still in motion, life is still alive. Where it stops out of fear of judgment, fear of being seen as too much, the human being still exists, but only as a structure frozen by shame. False self is not a state in which you are restrained, forced, or oppressed from the outside. False self is the moment shame makes you stop wanting to become more than who you were yesterday. You still work, still interact, still fulfill social roles, but every choice in life is filtered through an unspoken question. Will this make me judged? When no decision requires you to stake yourself, when your heart no longer tightens with risk, not because you are strong enough, but because you are afraid of being wrong, afraid of exposure, afraid of being seen. Nietzsche would say plainly, this is not peace. This is the will to power paralyzed by shame. False self functions perfectly in a life where shame is meticulously avoided. But the price paid is that life is no longer a challenge, only a sequence of rational responses designed to maintain a safe image. Nietzsche believed that a human being is truly themselves only when living in the tension of becoming, when life forces them to expand their capacity, responsibility, and inner depth, regardless of the risk of judgment. When that pressure disappears, because shame is placed above becoming, identity does not vanish in a single dramatic event, but erodes quietly within smooth operation. The clearest metaphor for false self is a river dammed out of fear of flooding. The water is still there, still flowing, still sufficient for irrigation. But out of fear of disrupting order, the current is blocked. No more floods, no more force, no more power to reshape the land. The river becomes gentle, predictable, useful, but it no longer creates any new forms. Your will to power is the same. When it is blocked by shame for long enough, it does not disappear. It simply stops shaping your life. A well-known case that shows how profoundly false self can bend a strong personality is the story of Lady Gaga. Before stepping onto the stage with the bold style the world knows, she once tried to be normal, dressing safely, writing easily digestible songs to fit the market. Gaga has said that during that period, she felt herself dying, not because of failure, but because she had to hide her most instinctive self to avoid being seen as strange. When she stopped normalizing herself, abandoning safe outfits, refusing the neatly packaged pop songs demanded by record labels, and performing her true eccentric style in New York clubs with the Fame Project, everything shifted. Not because she suddenly became more talented, but because she stopped concealing the cinematic theatrical sensibility at the core of her identity. The moment she brought elements once deemed too strange, such as performance art and extreme fashion, into her work, false self collapsed. And only then did her career explode, when the will to power no longer shrank to please others. When the layers of shame clinging to your life begin to thin, you will sense a change that is hard to name. Things that once felt just right suddenly feel constricting. There is no incident, no insult, no dramatic moment. Only a quiet inner contradiction growing, as if the strongest part of you is beginning to demand space to breathe. Nietzsche saw these moments not as signs of instability, but of vitality. When the will to power seeks expansion, it is not loud. It simply makes what once sufficed become too small. You can no longer endure roles you once played effortlessly. Conversations that once reassured you begin to feel hollow. Safe choices start to carry the scent of stagnation. This is a strange phase. Outwardly, you are still yesterday's self. But inwardly, the old structure has slipped a beat. Not rebellion, but a shift in center. From living so as not to be seen, to living so as not to betray yourself any longer. And when that shift completes, false self does not collapse in a single day. It dissolves like a shell that can no longer contain the being growing beyond it. Number 5. Destroying inner idols, NIETZSCHE'S path to liberation. And when false self begins to fall away, the journey does not stop at understanding how you are bound. Nietzsche forces you to take a far more dangerous step, destroying the very inner gods before which you have unconsciously knelt for years. For according to him, human beings are ruled not primarily by violence, but by values they have absolutized to the point of never daring to question them. Every true liberation begins with a shattering moment, raising the hammer and striking what was once considered sacred. Nietzsche wrote in The Gay Science, "God is dead, God remains dead, and we have killed him." This was not a religious declaration, but a ruthless truth about inner life. When your highest values collapse, you fall into a terrifying void, but it is precisely there that you gain the only chance to create your own values. And if you want to reclaim your identity, you must dare to step into that void, dare to destroy what once defined you, even at the cost of bone-deep unease. At a deeper level, this is not merely a philosophical maneuver. It is a direct intervention into your operating structure. In the human brain exists a network called the default mode network, the system that activates whenever you think about yourself, your value, your position in others' eyes. When a person grows up in shame, this network becomes hypersensitive to social gaze. It constantly scans for danger, judgment, being wrong, exclusion. But the moment you challenge an old belief, speak a truth that once made you shrink, or cross a boundary once deemed not allowed, the brain begins to rewire. Pathways of submission weaken. Pathways of self-authorship begin to form. Destroying inner idols is therefore not a vague spiritual gesture. It is a biological act. You are retraining the brain to no longer live under the rule of shame. Nietzsche was not a builder of systems through answers. He destroyed systems by making old answers unbearable. At this point, he intersects with a classical figure, Socrates. Socrates did not teach people how to live. He made them realize that what they believed they knew was empty. Nietzsche disagreed with Socrates on many things, but he recognized a ruthless principle there. To be free, one must first destroy, not the outer world, but the truths whose origins you have never questioned. As long as you bow before unexamined values, shame still has shelter. There is a modern story that illustrates this vividly. Jim Carrey, whom the world knows as a comedian, fell into crisis at the height of his fame. He realized that he had lived his entire life to become a lovable archetype, cheerful, harmless, funny. That was his inner idol, being validated through others' laughter. When he destroyed it, by confronting the emptiness of fame and admitting that he did not know who he was without the role, people called him crazy. Yet in that moment, he exposed the mechanism of shame with a single line. Depression is your avatar telling you it's tired of being this character. When you live too long inside a version built for acceptance, the soul exhausts itself. The collapse you fear is precisely what must happen, so you do not continue living in a false form. Look back at your own life. You will see how subtly inner idols have bound you. Perfectionism keeps you from trying. Obedience keeps you from speaking truth. Blind self-sacrifice makes you forget your own needs. Submission convinces you that living small is living safe. And shame convinces you that your nature itself is the problem. Nietzsche looked at each of these gods and said coldly, they were never sacred. They exist only because you fear freedom. Here Nietzsche introduces his most destructive act of liberation, revaluation of values. Not to find what is more correct, but to expose the power motives behind them. Look at each belief that has bound you and ask, who benefits if I believe this? If the answer is not you, that value does not belong to you. Look at each fear that makes you shrink and ask, is this truth or the residue of an old teaching? Most chains in life are not made of steel. They are made of habits of submission rationalized for far too long. The moment you raise the hammer for the first time, you will feel the tremor of old structures. Do not mistake it for error. It is a sign you are striking exactly where destruction is needed most. Nietzsche believed that no rebirth occurs through obedience. No identity is reclaimed while you still bow before values that once made you ashamed. Destroying inner idols does not make you better in others' eyes. It makes you no longer easy to control. And when the first crack resounds, you do not enter paradise. You enter responsibility. The responsibility to live without hiding behind borrowed values. The responsibility to shape yourself without blaming norms. That is the moment shame loses its footing, not because it disappears, but because it is no longer worshipped. And precisely there, the journey of how to overcome shame and reclaim your identity crosses the psychological threshold and becomes an irreversible existential act. If you have ever let go of an old value you once considered absolute and felt both emptier and lighter at the same time, leave a comment to mark the moment you dared to re-examine what once guided you. Such shares may become signals for others that everyone has the right to step out of forms that no longer fit. Number 6. Identity is not to be found, but to be created. And when the inner gods have collapsed, when the final echoes of the hammer fade into silence, the journey reaches its highest point, realizing that identity was never something to be found. It does not lie waiting somewhere in the past, in childhood memory, or in some true version you lost. For Nietzsche, identity is not an inheritance to recover, but a construction to be built. In Thus Spoke Zarathustra, Nietzsche wrote, "No one can build you the bridge on which you, and only you, must walk across the river of life." This line is not comforting. It is an existential verdict. No one can give you identity. No one lives for you. No one bears the responsibility of existence on your behalf. Identity appears only where you place yourself into action. Identity, in his view, is not memory, not innate personality, not social role. Identity is an ongoing process, an unfinished form, created day by day through choice, through action, through how you face life. Whether consciously or not, you are creating it. The difference is whether you do so unconsciously or as an artisan holding the chisel. I once met a woman named Lauren during a business trip to Chicago. She worked in finance, an environment where emotional control is exalted as professionalism. But beneath that composed exterior, Lauren carried a small secret from childhood. She loved music, especially piano, a longing she never dared to touch because it did not fit the image she was required to maintain. One evening, after a workday so long it felt like her soul had drained away, Lauren stopped in front of a music store. She went inside and enrolled in an evening piano class. 6 months later, Lauren stood on the stage of a small open mic night. Her fingers trembled, her breath fractured, but her eyes shone as if something long sealed had awakened. And for the first time, she did not say she had found herself. She said, "I am becoming." That was not a moment of discovering identity. It was the moment identity began to take form, where the old self cracked and a new will first demanded the right to exist. To grasp the aesthetics of this process, imagine a block of marble standing in the center of a room. Outsiders see only a heavy mass of stone. The sculptor sees the form imprisoned within. His work is not to create from nothing, but to remove excess. Nietzsche viewed human beings in exactly this way. Identity is not out there waiting to be found. It lies within, covered by borrowed forms, values you did not choose, roles repeated for too long. Each time you act according to your life force rather than habit, a layer of stone falls away. Identity is not discovered, it is carved. And when you look back, you must face a truth Nietzsche never softened. No one has the right to grant you your identity. It appears only through creative action. Identity is the consequence of choices you dare to hold, even when they make life harder, less fitting, less secure. This is why Nietzsche admired the figure of the free spirit, not the loud rebel, but the one who lives by laws of their own making. A free spirit does not wait to be accepted before existing. They exist first and accept the cost of not fitting. They do not ask, "Is this reasonable?" but, "Does this make the life force in me stronger?" They do not adjust themselves to please the world, but adjust life so as not to betray their inner truth. Imagine standing before a mirror. From childhood, you were taught to look into it to check, am I acceptable enough, safe enough, agreeable enough? Nietzsche wants you to look at the mirror differently, not to measure conformity, but to ask a single question. Who am I creating from myself? The moment you ask that, you are no longer a product. You become an author. You do not need dramatic acts. You need choices that do not ask permission, daring to hold a decision, daring to pursue an unguaranteed desire, daring to live by a rhythm that is not applauded. No action is small if it expands the shape of who you are. And eventually, you will understand what Nietzsche knew long ago. The strongest human being is not the one who conquers the world, but the one who dares to create themselves. Not to find, not to ask, not to wait, only to create. And in that process, identity is no longer a question. It becomes the trace of a living force in motion, an unfinished human being, a human being Nietzsche named with perfect precision, the becoming one. If you have come this far, you have touched the truth Nietzsche forces humanity to face without evasion. Shame is not your nature. It is a chain. And reclaiming your identity is not a journey of finding yourself, like a lost memory, but a journey of shattering every old value that made you forget who you are. You have seen the origin of shrinking, seen how self-betrayal is formed, seen herd morality operate like a prison without bars, seen the false self-mask obscure the real light within you, and seen one irreversible truth: identity is not to be found, but to be created. More importantly, you have seen what Nietzsche always emphasized. No one breaks the cage for you. No one returns you to your true self. No one gives you the strength to step out of shame. You must seize it yourself. Those who flee shame live by roles. Those who face it step into freedom. If this message awakens something in you, like and share the video as a signal to yourself that you have begun stepping out of the old cage. Nietzsche was right. You were not born to live smaller. You were born to become yourself.